everyone tuning into today's webinar, Advanced Security Robotics, a roundtable discussion with Citizens Bank and Allied Universal. We'll be doing Q&A at the end, as well as a live technology demo towards the back half of the webinar, so please stay tuned. I am your moderator host, Michael Quiroga, Chief Revenue Officer for Asylon Robotics. Next slide, please. So joining me today is Citizens Bank Vice President of Physical Security, Derek Lemire, one of the industry's original pioneers in robotic security, as well as Michael Hanlon, Vice President of Integrated Solutions at Allied Universal Technology Services. He oversees the integration of artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics. And today we hope to tap into Mike's 30-year plus of experience in developing programs for clients, leveraging advanced technologies like robotics. So next slide, please. So before we get started, I typically like to begin with a quick poll to gauge the audience. So with that being said, I'll read this out for everyone. Does your organization leverage advanced automation in its security posture? A, yes, we integrate video, access control, and other systems. B, no, all of our security technology is siloed. C, maybe, not sure, we have some systems that talk to each other. D, what is advanced automation? I'm just here for the robots. So I'm curious what the audience here thinks. We'll give it a couple of seconds. Derek, with you being kind of the headliner on the end user side, I'm gonna go ahead and guess that the majority of our audience is gonna be in the A category. I don't know about you.
You know, I'm leaning that way myself. I'm hoping so.
Yes, look at that. Look at that. So 62% yes, 16% no, 18% some, and we got 4% of the folks here just for the robots. Love it. So I guess next slide, please. So today's webinar is a continuation from our Intro to Security Robotics webinar earlier this year. You know, we heard from Mercedes-Benz Stadium and Six Flags security executives focusing on the initial part of the robotic security journey, which is kind of problem definition and research and diligence. Next slide, please. So today we're focusing on building a program. You know, coming off of the GSX trade show, you know, this topic couldn't be timelier. Robotics continues to be top of mind with end users. And in the first half alone of this year, you know, it's estimated that hundreds of robots were deployed globally, you know, from perimeter security missions to citywide drones acting as first responders. I think the adoption curve is really heating up. So next slide, please. So today, you know, we have with us, you know, Derek, I said it earlier, I would argue you and the Citizens organization were one of the original pioneers in robotic security, you know, deploying both air and ground years ago. So for our audience members, you know, who aren't so familiar with your experience, can you share a little bit of background on your experience in the evolution of this technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So good afternoon or good morning to everybody out there, and thanks for joining. So we started down this path roughly 6.5 years ago, right? So ground and air deployments, started testing the waters per se, right? Seeing what the capabilities that were out there were. And from our perspective, and I think from most of the folks that have joined today, right? The perspective is, right, a lot of these are startups, right? So getting in on the ground floor and being able to sculpt and mold these tools into what you need them to be has been a great asset for us, right? We started out 6 years ago. We've continued to get better at what we're doing, and we're kind of experiencing the results and enjoying the results now.
That's fantastic. Next slide, please. So, this is a quick snapshot, of just kind of how the journey's begun. Mike, a lot of your experience, comes from touching a lot of the different end users across a lot of different verticals. What's some of your take on robotics and some of the different deployment aspects? What are you seeing out there with robotics in your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So similar to Derek, 6-7 years ago, we really started, digging in further. In our case, we have to look at it at two levels, right? We have to look at it as at the end user level of, what is this going to do for our customers? What's it going to do for the sites we're protecting? And then secondly, who's the best partner? Who are we going to be bringing in to solve for these issues and challenges that sites have? So like similar to the path Derek went down with citizens, we started understanding real value and real use cases for both the aerial and the ground-based units. At the end of the day, for us, it's another endpoint. It's another device that it has detection. It can send video signal. But there's certain advantages for being rapidly deployed, for being mobile. It's kind of glib to say, but we say glib things all the time, right? Like, it's not getting worse, it's getting better. And we've seen that trajectory. The technology, the reliability, the uptime, the sensors, the camera capabilities, all of those things are in continuous improvement. So we're happy that we jumped on board with Asylon really early.
Fantastic. Yeah, and Derek, obviously we have a quick snapshot. Can you explain for some of the audience members what we're looking at? How has a lot of this experience, culminated to what we're seeing here, and how that kind of affects, the topics at hand today?
Yeah, so a couple key points, right? So the grounds you're looking at, right? The map you have on the left-hand side of the screen, right? Just think of it, this is an open campus, right? The public is welcome. There's ball fields, there's walking trails, right? There's all that fun stuff, right? We've hardened the facilities, but the exterior is open to the public, right? So these numbers represent, not only colleagues, right? Or people that are showing up for nefarious reasons, right? But the public out there. And if you look at, miles patrolled, 3,900 miles in under a year. That's an impressive mark, right? This thing being on the dog being on patrol as it is, right? And the drone sentry, how many flights and how many hours it's actually spent physically up in the air, right? Serves a purpose, right? It's visual, right? It's a deterrence just in being visual, right? But as you can see, the security events that have been reported through the SOC and then contacting our SOC, so we could have a rapid deployment of resources, i.e. guards, right, on site to deal with these type of incidents, right, has really helped us.
Yeah, no, and so, seeing that and kind of listening to that, Mike, how have you seen, the deployment of some of these robotic assets across the field? Next slide, please, Ryan. I think this is what really plays into, Derek was one of the very first entities to deploy both air and ground. He has a lot of experience in seeing the benefits of, what an aerial asset, provides to a security posture. He sees the benefits of the ground-based assets as well. He has a particular threat vector. Again, the benefit of AUTS and your role is you get to see a multitude of different threat vectors, different security postures. How do you see people incorporating air versus ground? What are some of the pros and cons that you're seeing as you're, the ramping up of this type of technology is heating up?
Yeah, so Mike, I kind of dial back probably like 10 pages in my playbook. So like when I'm talking air versus ground, that's a mature conversation that's very far along in the assessment process for us. So we really do have conversations with our customers to really look at, you know, what keeps them up at night, what's their risk, what are they looking to solve for. And, you know, robotics, it sounds counterintuitive that a manned guarding company would be looking at automation and robotics, but we don't see it as manned services are better or technology are better. What we see is companies that provide technology services with their manned guarding are better than those that don't. So we're going to sit there and really drill down into really what specifically is happening with this customer or at this site, and then solving, you know, later with the ground-based unit versus the aerial-based units, or maybe a combination of the two, and then lastly, connecting that into our manned assets, and those people could be on site. They could be officers in fixed positions or posts, or they could be rovers. Could be a command center at the site of the customer, or it could be in our monitoring and response center that's been utilizing robotics and automation for quite a time. So again, it's really more of a whiteboarding, you know, workflow about coming out with, you know, the best solution. And quite frankly, it's always written in pencil, right? Because we're always improving, so it's always changing and new challenges are coming up. So
Understood. And so Derek, again, when you were looking originally robotics, were you looking through the lens of air versus ground? How did you arrive to the combination of those assets? And maybe that kind of goes into the next slide, which is you know, defining scope, right? Because I think it ultimately comes down to understanding what you're trying to accomplish. You know, site selection. Each site is unique, has its own security posture. So how did you get into identifying air versus ground specifically when it comes to defining the scope, you know, creating the goals, the KPIs, building that force multiplier, and justifying a lot of this, the deployment of these assets?
So I think Michael hit the nail on the head, right? So first of all, you have to know what you're after, right? What is your goal, you know, with the deployments of these assets, right? And is it realistic, right? And if you rewind back 6 years ago when we started going down this journey, right? You look at battery times, uptime versus downtime, right? And we quickly realized that the technology isn't where we wanted it to be quite yet, right? So it spent more time charging than working, right? And when you have big gaps like that, you have two big things, right? You can either double or triple your resources, right? Which is a huge cost, or you can use it as a supplemental tool, right? And that's what we looked at originally, right? And because we were looking at ground and air, right, we decided to combine them both, right, to get our most bang for a buck, right, the most uptime possible, right? So when the ground asset isn't moving around, when it's in a charged state, right, we have an aerial asset that's kind of taken over, right? And they can work in conjunction today if you want them to, right? But when we first started down this path, right, that wasn't a capability, right? So it was all about uptime.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and if we can go to the next slide, you know, I think, you know, from the value added reseller, the allied experience, I think you guys do a great job, and I think that this is where having the experience of doing the site selection, you talked about it, Mike, a lot of that consultative approach of how the end user is going to leverage this particular piece of technology to solve that problem in a layered approach, right? Robotics is not the end all be all. Obviously, I think one of the takeaways that folks will have from this conversation is that it is a specific tool layered on to solve a specific problem. And that's, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so at GSX, we released our World Security Report, and it's a CSO driven initiative that we have where we're really looking at, you know, what are the risks out there? What are the broad spectrum of our customers looking at? And we're seeing, we're getting very interesting outcomes and information that comes out of that report. Civil unrest and economic uncertainty is putting a challenge on CSOs. So now we're looking to solve for more. We're looking to offer new solutions and different solutions. One of the things I would say that we always lean into whenever we're talking about robotics and some of our automation platforms is the layered approach, right? Like it has separate power. It's on a different network. So you're adding it. And look, when you're talking about technology with man guarding services, that's a layered approach already. This adds another layer now. It adds more resiliency in order to maintain communication and connection to what's occurring at the site, and it pushes out what we can do from the site to further on the edge.
And if we can get, and I think that's a perfect segue into, and if you can get to the next slide, please, which is, the operationalizing of this technology, right? Once you've defined those KPIs, you define what success is, you define exactly all the metrics that these robotic assets are deployed, you can measure that success. And I think this is a quick snapshot, and there's nobody better to speak about the cuts and bruises of operationalizing this technology than you, Derek. You mentioned 6 years in the making. Today you are still deploying air and ground assets. Can you talk to a little bit about, for your colleagues listening, what operationalizing really means, and some of these key points showed on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So operationally, right, you want to run the full gamut, right? So you want to go all the way from deploying an asset to how you're physically going to respond to an issue, right? And if you have a gap in any part of that process, right, then it's going to be a failure, right? So you have to plan ahead, right? Plan on what the capability of the asset is, right? And how you're going to fill that void and get a human presence out there to keep your customers, colleagues, whatever it may be, safe, right? Or vendors, right? Whoever's on your site. That's the key, right? I think one thing we learned, thankfully, we haven't had a lot of bumps and bruises, right? Outside of weather, right? So I think our initial deployment was a wheeled, robot, right? We're up in the Northeast, right? We get snow. And as we worked with the company to try to get better, right, we realized that some things you just can't avoid, right? And as snow's falling, right, a wheeled type robot is going to have some deficiencies, right? So if you're not up on your snow plowing, your shoveling, et cetera, right, you can expect that system or that robot at the time is going to have to take a break, right? Do you have someone to fill that void, right? Because it's going to happen, right? You still need to be out there avoiding slips and falls and all that fun stuff that goes along with it. But at the same time, you've lost a set of eyes, right? So it's kind of important, right? It's end-to-end risk reduction, right? And every one of us, I think, is in the business of reducing risk, right? So it's thinking through long-term, not short-term, long-term, and getting there. I think one other thing I'd like to mention, right, is I had a great coworker with me that helped deploy our current assets, right? I think the big thing we've done right on our deployments, right, is really getting the buy-in of the other colleagues, right? That's our base, right? Those are the people we're trying to protect, right? So getting it out there, having a naming convention, having meet and greets, let them meet the robot, let them see it, right? Just a real funny story, right? 5 years ago, we opened this corporate campus, right, which is absolutely beautiful. Groundbreaking, ribbon cutting, to include governors and high-ranking officials here for the opening, right? And the robot got more social media hits than the opening of the campus, right? So although the properties folks didn't enjoy that, right, it just showed that we did a good job, right, getting the word out and getting colleagues invested into security.
Yeah, I think that's one of the takeaways that I had, particularly the evolution of operationalizing these robots, is the buy-in, is the socializing, going from initial knee-jerk reactions to incorporating this almost of the employees having a sense of ownership of the assets, particularly on the quadruped. But you brought up a couple of different points that I think Mike can speak to, because today is about education on robotics. You brought up wheeled versus the robot that you're currently deploying as a quadruped. Mike, the Allied brand, you have a multitude of different tools. Can you speak to some of the benefits of unstructured terrain on the quadruped that you've seen recently, and versus wheeled robots in some respects?
Yeah, so it certainly has to be part of the consideration, and we've seen a movement towards the quadrupeds for the reasons that you and Derek have outlined, right? So we're gonna that's certainly gonna be part of the assessment, and part of the the recommendations that we make. What I really like right now, you're showing images that come from the units, which really is important. I think Derek's so spot on. Like, we'll go into, and Mike, you've seen it a million times, right? 50 people, everyone's got their arms crossed, they have questions about battery life and terrain and all. And the drone dog walks around the room and all the cameras come out and everyone starts smiling, and they get such a kick out of it. What's interesting is that's not what we're getting. That's not the value of it needs to traverse the terrain and have uptime and be reliable. But the images you're showing and the outcomes and the reporting is really, so we really lean into more of what we do out of our monitoring and response center and what we're seeing, like you're showing now, because that's the value. And what I find interesting, and I'm sure Derek has seen the same thing, like, people look at these images and they're really surprised. Like, we saw in the news the escaped convict that was on the run in Pennsylvania for near 2 weeks. Like, that the thermal images, now, it wasn't a drone, it was out of a helicopter, but we all know it's the same thing, right? Like, so thermal imaging captured him, and they sent a patrol in. We're seeing that technology. Like, we're seeing this technology work and deliver, right?
Well, Ryan, if we could do a next slide, please, because I think that's precisely what you're talking about, right? These thermal images, these are sample images for air and ground thermally, and capturing, exactly that scenario.
A person, an overhead door that's open that shouldn't be open, fence line issues. Like, we're seeing, and when people see the images, and like you're showing now in the reporting capabilities, that's the part that they haven't seen, because everyone's focused on the dog and everyone looks at everyone wants to know about battery life and airtime and all that, which they're good questions, and they're legitimate issues to resolve for. But this is what we really need to focus on, is showing the back end of what's the data, what's the information, and how's it being delivered, so that we can get to the predictable outcomes.
And great segue. If we can, what we do have is some back end videos. Derek, maybe you can talk through, and this is twofold. I like these videos, right? One, it gives folks tuning in what the back end of robotic systems looks like. One for you, Derek, maybe you can talk us through, how your team utilizes the back end, viewing the software, et cetera. And then, Mike, for you, how this ultimately is going to tie into monitoring centers and being, another key piece of intelligent monitoring, right? For the first time, security has a robotic asset to go out and, I don't want to say touch someone, but, actually manipulate physically from thousands of miles away that site. So we'll start with you, Derek. Talk us through what we're looking at.
Yeah, so what you're looking at is actual video from our corporate campus, right, up in Johnston, Rhode Island, right. So as you saw, it went from a regular camera view to night vision, right, and that's helped us in so many ways, right. So not only has the colleagues felt safer because we told them about it, right, but simple things like seeing people crouch behind a car, right? We're a 24/7 facility, right? So nighttime is a real threat to people, right? We have parking lots that are well lit, et cetera, right? But like every other person on this call, right, and every other person in the world, right, we all know somebody that has a domestic situation going on, right, or has a threat to someone else, or knows someone with a threat to their safety, right? So tools like this, right, being able to identify a deer walking through the woods rather than a human walking through the woods up into the campus, right? You can do that, but with a land or ground asset instead of deploying a guard to go intercept, and that just, it saves time, right? It saves time and increases security.
And I guess, to you, Mike, what are your thoughts seeing this? How from one of the largest guarding companies on the planet, and having, a ton of resources, everything's migrating to intelligent monitoring. And, how are you hearing from customers when they see this back end and they see the progression of the intelligence of robotics? What are you hearing, right? Like, how are they, do you see any aha moments happening from the end user side of how they're going to incorporate this or leverage the intelligent monitoring?
Yeah, so probably the biggest growth part of what we're doing from a managed program approach is dedicated seats. So we're doing that completely outsourced SOC business or function for our customers. And those customers are coming to us with diverse needs and diverse challenges of their sites and of their risk. And they're just always asking us, okay, what haven't we looked at? What more can we do? Give me another layer of this, or there's got to be a better image, or there's got to be a more thorough approach that we can tack on to what you've already designed. And robotics and drones are doing that. They're solving for that. It's not a one size fits all, but it fits perfectly into that blended offering to bring into that discussion of, okay, we've designed this system and this is what we're getting. Here's another layer, and here are the benefits that we'll get out of that.
You're spot on, Mike. You mentioned earlier, this is a force multiplier, right? Plain and simple, that's what it does, right? Alone, it's a camera, and right, it's all about building it into your structure, right? Into your guard force, into your response mechanism, right? It's a tool within that tool bag.
Yeah. And so, finally, I'll kind of end this for the presentation side of the house. We're obviously going to have Q&A here shortly, but we're coming up against our time. I would say, what do you see next, Derek? You guys are the pioneers. You guys have crossed the chasm for refining and tuning. For your colleagues listening, I guess assuming that you continue to be pioneers, what do you see next on the horizon for leveraging these technologies from a physical security standpoint?
So I think a few things, right? So I think Mike mentioned as well earlier, right? So our current deployment, right, and our previous deployments as well, right? We're running them outside of our security network, right? I think ultimately there's going to come a time and day, right, where it's going to be more integrated into card access platforms, integrated into doorways, right? Integrated into a higher level of maybe license plate recognition, et cetera, those kind of things, right? Rather than just a fixed asset that's moving around, right? It's gonna bring in more systems in analytic capabilities, right? That's what I see as our future.
Loaded question. Do you foresee it doing tasks outside of security and leveraging it with different colors of money?
So that's always a possibility, right? I don't see it today, right? I don't think our technology is there today, right? And that's not saying robotics isn't there or getting there, right? I don't think our technology is ready for that yet.
Copy. So same question to you, Mike. What do you see on the horizon as we rapidly see, this sector heating up? The questions going from, I think it's cool, to I have an RFI or an RFQ. I'd love to incorporate, your organization into this.
Yeah, so I think the layers and the resiliency will continue to be key drivers. I think we'll see terrains and environmental concerns that where the robotics can solve, where people or existing technologies don't really solve for the issues. And then the last thing I'd say, the association of data, taking other information and then using the drones or the robots to validate or give it another look. I always use the example, dwell time. It's an analytic that delivers a lot of value in certain instances. But if you run a shopping center and you're getting dwell alerts from your entrances, well, is it raining outside? Because when people get to the exit and it's raining, they're looking for an umbrella or they're waiting for it to slow down. That's really what we can do with a drone. What's what we can do with a robotic device, in that give a bigger picture. So now you have a few people congregating at a gate. Well, there could have been two people pulling over having a conversation, but you deploy a unit, you get a high level look, and now you see a lot of other people coming over, and you see people assembling. That information, and getting that information as early as possible, is tremendously valuable, because now you're deploying assets. Your responses are already. You're not waiting until you have 100 people at the gate. You're not waiting until you have 100 people at the door. And we all talk about that in the timeliness of the information, or the association of different data points to give us better information and have a more scheduled reaction to it.
Copy. Well, with that being said, I think we have come to our Q&A portion of the webinar. Ryan, I will turn it over to you to maybe field some of the questions that we've been getting throughout the webinar.
Yeah, so the first question here, you mentioned third-party data. Can you go further into what third-party data sources you are using at your clients' facilities to add greater context to situations that dogs or drones are surveilling?
I think was that you, Mike, who mentioned the third party? So I'll defer to you on that one.
Yeah, so I just actually kind of teased one already by weather, right? Weather is data that where you need to associate the activity at a site with what you're seeing with your devices, or what you're seeing on video. Civil unrest would be another that we will use data sources for risk and intelligence analysis of what's going on in the area, what's going on with a brand, what's going on maybe at the sea level, so that we're associating levels of risk. So there may be something that we're seeing, an event that's occurring near a campus that we're protecting, and now that will spill over and start affecting the site. So it's both people and communication to alert out on that risk, and to put our manned security professionals in the most valuable positions to respond to that. And Derek, I'm sure on your side you're doing the same thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. Even we mentioned, that being able to pick up heat, right? That's something big, right? Did the car stay running, right? Is a generator overheating, right? Is a generator on? Why does it need to be on, right? Those things you're using almost third-party resources, right? To identify other risks to the organization.
Perfect. Next question, Ryan.
I think this one is geared towards you, Derek. Having deployed drones and robots for the past 6 years, are you starting to see any kind of ROI with these types of devices? And what does that look like?
So absolutely, right? So for instance, and I won't go into a lot of detail, right? But if you look at our current deployment, right, our return on investment happened within the first 9 months, right? We're saving on average, well, not even on average. The actual number is $200K a year, right? So it's taken over the job of a couple exterior resources for the campus, right? So we're utilizing man guarding, for like we should, right, to supplement, and we're using it as a team, right? So as either the aerial asset or the quadruped identifies something, now we have a response mechanism rather than doing routine patrols, right? So it's a true partnership rather than just having a man guarding, right? So we're seeing cost benefits, yes.
Got
Next
another one
question.
here. Yep. Have you encountered, I think this one's for you, Mike Q. Have you encountered any theft of the asset attempts, and what prevention factors do you have to mitigate this?
Great question. So the short answer is we have not experienced any attempts of theft on the asset yet. I say yet. These are deployed in areas that are dull, dirty, dangerous, and so I think that we do have protective measures. I mean, ultimately, the response that I have with folks when this comes up is it has autonomous capabilities, so it does have GPS tracking. So in the event that someone does have nefarious intentions, you know, they would have essentially picked up the most expensive piece of LoJack on the planet. And from a prosecution standpoint, you know, you're not talking about, you know, petty theft here, right? You know, you now have teeth because of the value of this asset. You now have prosecution teeth that really sticks, right? You're talking about, you know, a felony type charges on you know, that type of theft and vandalism. So you know, that's typically the answer. There are tamper-proof things that we're working on. Our origin story comes from the Department of Defense. So there are mechanisms that are being developed for anti-tampering for the assets. But ultimately that is the long answer to that.
You know, Mike, I was doing a presentation with one of your colleagues recently, and first question was, what would you do if somebody attacks us with like a 2x4? And your colleague spoke first, but my answer was, well, what would we do if our officer was attacked with a 2x4? I'd rather somebody attack the dog. You know, the answer, you know, that was given was it'll be covered. But my question is more about, well, is this happening at your site? And if it is, let's put a dog there, not one of our people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it goes back to where robotics really excel, right? Dull, dirty, dangerous type tasks and environments.
Right.
And so, you know, and from a theft perspective, right, you know, we do deploy these from the Asylon perspective, we do deploy these with coverage and whatnot. So, you know, from the end user perspective, yeah, you are covered.
I've picked one up. I wouldn't want to steal one.
Yeah, I mean, so fortunately, right now, you know, the robotic assets are changing behaviors, right? I mean, this is very another unique capability of the robot is that for nefarious actors, they really don't know how to size this thing up. You know, they don't know the capabilities of it, so they tend to go elsewhere to do those types of nefarious actions. So, Ryan, next question, please.
Got another one here about robotics for the Department of Defense. What's the timeline for robotics to be cleared devices for the DoD?
Cleared devices for the DoD. Oof, that's a loaded one. I don't think I'm qualified to answer for the DoD on that one. I'll gladly have a one-on-one with that question. But I would just say that, you know, Asylon is definitely leading the way on a lot of the adoption for robotics for perimeter security. I'm very proud of that. So stay tuned for some announcements on that front as well later this month.
Got another one here. Let's see, definitely ties into some of the stuff that you're doing, Derek, out of Citizens, but does this system work for K through 12 school campus security?
Oh, without a doubt it would. Absolutely, without a doubt it would, right? And again, it goes back to an earlier statement, right? I think K through 12 they're moldable human beings, right? They're just learning. They like technology. No, they love technology, right? It is everything they do is technology based, right? So I think having a canine in that environment, right, brings two things, right? Increases their intrigue and interest into robotics, right? So you're teaching them. But at the same time, right, it makes them part of security, right? So schools across the country put SROs in in the schools, et cetera, right? Which is great, right? But it's one person, right? If you can again go back to the force multiplier, right? If they have tools that really interest them and grab them, then they'll have the buy-in even at an early age.
I think that's a great topic. And I think that one's near and dear. My wife is an educator. And I think also we have some exciting news on that front, but I mirror Derek's sentiments on that application. It hasn't been proven out yet, but would love the opportunity to do that, to see if it would be a useful asset for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is, getting our youth and the next the workforce of the future, if you will, right? I think this goes into the allies of the world and, how they're motivating our next generation of getting into the security space. I think that's, having these types of things correlate. Security is everybody's responsibility, as you said, Derek, and starting this at an early age and incorporating would be something very interesting to see if it would be useful. We'll continue with some more questions. I think we're coming up on time. We'll continue to answer questions as they're coming. Ryan, next question, please.
Yeah, and just real quick, everybody feel free to put those Q&As just in the box. If we don't get to it today, we will send some personal emails as well following up with the answer to those. So make sure you put those in the box. The next question we've got here is about drones. So what are the FAA considerations for drones?
I will defer the initial response to Derek, and then I'll add some color commentary if needed. Derek?
So this answer makes me very happy, right? So remember, right, going back 6 years ago, we tried to do everything in-house, right? We had great partners in our robotics and our aerial drone companies, right, supporting us, right? But we had a requirement to have our own pilot on site and follow those FAA regulations, right? And as you can imagine, with headcount, turnover, and everything that's vacation time, everything that goes involved in that, right? We found ourselves lacking the necessary licensed folks on campus, right? And that's one of the main reasons, right? Well, one of the driving reasons for us to start looking at updating and upgrading our aerial device and also our robot, right? So now, as a robot as a service, right? Even the drone as a service, right? It's hands off for us, right? It has freed up our time, freed up our resources, and quite frankly, it's on Asylon to provide all that, right? If there's outage time, they report that to us, right? If something goes bad or breaks, right, they fix it, right? They've dedicated uptime they need to in milestones they have to hit, right? And they do a fantastic job with it. So it's taken all the stress off me, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, real quick, since you bring it up, kudos to our operations team for plugging and obviously getting the kudos from Derek. That's big. The unsung heroes from the Asylon organization. So from the FAA side of the house, I liken the regulation to dog years. I think that it's been 6 years since we've had the imagination of leveraging these assets for security tools and much more. But alas, I've been quoted saying this before. Innovation moves at the speed of imagination, and government moves at the speed of government. And so I think that this last year, we've seen a tremendous progression with the FAA waivers, having multiple entities that are not even Asylon have these breakthrough beyond visual line of sight waivers that have been fantastic for the entire industry. As of late, I will plug, some of the accomplishments with Asylon. We've recently were awarded as a subcontractor to start testing multiple drones from a single operator remotely through our what we call Robotic Security Operations Center. So the progression from having this vision of unattended flights with these robotic assets is here today, and I think the proliferation of that we'll see a drastic uptick, come next year, and organizations like, Citizens, who have been doing this for some time now under that as a service model, are gonna truly start to reap some of the rewards of these latest, FAA breakthroughs. Next question. Again, we'll continue to, if Derek, Mike, if you guys got we got a jet, please let us know. But ultimately, I think we're getting some great questions here.
Got another one here. So what are some of the liability, either risks or de-risks, associated with these types of devices operating in an open environment like this?
I'll let you, Derek, speak to from the end user perspective, and then I can jump in as needed. And Hanlon, you can jump in too.
You're making this really easy on me, right? I have no risk, right? So there's always inherent risk, right? And there's reputational risk, right? But being a robot as a service, again, right? The insurance, everything else is covered by the provider. So it's released all the risk from me, right? I mean, we have a risk of, right? We want to portray the assets, right, as assets, right? They're not toys, right? We don't want colleagues thinking they're toys, and no one likes to be thought of as the team that's wasting money, right? So we want to share those results of what we're seeing and show how we're keeping colleagues safe, right? But at the same time, right, we don't have to worry about the bad stuff, right? Break a bone, land wrong, whatever it may be, right? Uptime becomes the provider's main focus, right? Fix it, get it back up there, right? And there's no liability on us.
Yep. Yeah. So we, from the Asylon side, we deploy this as a service, white glove service. And so we deploy this and incur and have a lot of that coverage for our customers, as Derek mentioned, and going through value added resellers and partners like AUS, this is where, the combination of that type of partnership, deploying these in conjunction, really exacerbates some of that de-risking, for that end user. I don't know, Mike, maybe that's something that you can touch on from the Allied side. I mean, that's right up your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so we're right in the middle. So I'm not immune to it on one level, and I'm not. We have a role in assessing what that risk and what our role is in the delivery of the service. So it's certainly something we need to make part of our assessment. But quite frankly, analyzing the risk of the solution is really just another step that you should be taking anyway when you're providing the solution itself. So that the liability and the risk associated with the technology is something we're used to going through.
And so, Ryan, I think we'll have maybe one or two more questions, and we'll wrap it up.
Let's do one more, and this one's from me here, directed at Derek, if you don't mind. So this type of technology as a whole has already obviously been around for a number of years. You've been evaluating it for 6 years or so, but it's still relatively new. So what was it exactly that made you take the leap of faith to make the decision to operationalize this kind of technology? Was it the cost of inaction and not pursuing this type of technology? Was it to get some kind of benefit? What was it that kind of made you finalize that kind of decision to pursue?
I think that's a great question, right? So there's a couple things, right? So we kind of were out there at the forefront, right, with robotics, right? At that time, it was partnering with a great partner, right? And I can honestly say we've made some really good decisions organizationally here, right? And now we're partnered with Asylon directly for these services, right? But our former contracts, right, were with other companies, right? But it was the same standard, right? And it was the same customer service, right? That's what it came down to, right? So again, we're putting our names on something that's not necessarily ours or controlled by us, right? So it's very important to us, right? So having the right partner means everything, right? Having SLAs, laying out and then working with them, right? So robotics is, although been around for 5, 6, 7 years, right? is a huge opportunity to get better, right? So it's truly partnering with your partner as well, right? So what's working, what's not working? What do you think are great ideas, right? And I'm not saying everyone goes and gets manufactured, right? But if enough of the customers are asking for the same thing, right, it makes it so the provider, it's an avenue, it's a revenue stream for them, right? They want to build to what the customer needs and wants, right? So I think that's the first thing, right? Partner with the right companies, right? Set a standard, define what you want out of that robot, right? Or the drone, right? Define what you want and then set out on that course, right? I think that's the first thing, right? Two is grow with it, right? It's not just something, it's not a camera you're throwing up in the corner and it's just going to work for 5 to 7 years, right? It's a work in progress, right? As you have turnover within the company, as things change, the parking diagram, right? Stay in tune with them, right? New guards come on, right? Show them what the asset is, right? It's not there to replace people, right? Again, force multiply. It's there to help people, right? It's all that stuff all wrapped into one, right? But have a plan going into it.
Great answer, Derek. And so to really put an exclamation point on all this, again, really appreciate everyone tuning in, listening to, again, one of the folks that I look up to in this space for being a pioneer and having the vision, Derek and Citizens Bank. Mike Hanlon, our partners at AUS, thank you for joining. Mike, thank you for imparting your wisdom and sharing this. For the folks that didn't get some of your questions or want to see this will be available online on YouTube. So we will send this out. If you did register, you will get an email, a link to this. But if you do have more questions for Derek, specifically, Derek, I don't want to speak for you. Can people reach out to you if they have questions, specifically colleagues in the space? Yeah, well, he's on LinkedIn. Michael, same thing. Tremendous partners. So with that being said, any closing thoughts, Derek, Mike?
No, I think to wrap up for me, one, thank you for having me. But two, any questions, feel free to reach out, right? To me, security has become my life, right? It's a passion for me. It's a passion for the folks I surround myself with, right? So I live and breathe this stuff. So if you have any questions, you need anything in the future, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, Derek.
Same here. I mean, look, the why Asylon or why this technology is because, we're not only delivering on it today, but we're having conversations like this so that we're delivering on it better tomorrow. So thanks for putting this together.